At my son's wedding reception, he leaned down and whispered in my ear, "Mom, we need you to sit at table 12. With the cousins. Table 12 was in the back corner, near the kitchen doors. I smiled and nodded. What he didn't know was that I had written the check for the entire wedding 3 weeks earlier. $114,000. Good evening, dear listeners. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. My name is Adele, and I want to tell you a story I've never told anyone in full, not even my sister. If you stay until the end, I think you'll understand why it took me this long to say it out loud. Please like this video and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It means more than you know. I am 67 years old. I was a pediatric nurse for 31 years at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I worked nights, holidays, double shifts. I watched children fight for their lives, and I held their parents' hands when the fighting was over. My husband, George, was a high school history teacher. We were not wealthy people, but we were careful. We saved. We invested modestly. We paid off our house on Claremont Avenue in 2009, threw a small party in the backyard, and felt like millionaires. George died of a stroke in the spring 4 years ago. 63 years old, still planning his next semester's curriculum. He was there on a Tuesday and gone by Thursday. I won't describe what those weeks were like. You either know or you don't, and if you know, I'm sorry. My son, Chadwick, we call him Chad, is my only child. He's 38. He works in commercial real estate, lives in Chicago with his wife, Portia, and their 2 daughters, Lily and June, who are 7 and 9. When George died, Chad flew in immediately. He sat with me, handled the arrangements, called the relatives. For those first few months, he was everything I needed him to be. The shift was gradual, so gradual I missed it the way you miss water heating in a pot, right up until the moment it boils. It started with the down payment on their first house in the Naperville suburb. "Mom, we found the perfect place, but we're $40,000 short. We'll pay you back once we sell our condo." Of course I helped. I transferred the money within the week. The condo sold 9 months later. The repayment never came. Then it was Lily's school. A private academy, the only one with the right program for her reading difficulties. $12,000 a year. "Mom, you know how important early intervention is. You worked with kids." Understand. I did understand. I transferred the tuition. That was year 1. Year 2 followed. Year 3 was underway. Portia's car needed replacing, the furnace in the new house. A medical bill Chad said the insurance had denied. Each time, there was a reason. Each time, there was a promise. "I'll make it right, Mom. You know I will. I want to be honest with you because you deserve honesty." I kept giving, not because I was foolish, though maybe I was. I kept giving because every time I considered saying no, Chad would mention the girls. June is asking about summer camp again. Lily's been upset about missing the school trip. I don't know how to explain to a 7-year-old why she can't go. I am their grandmother. I love those girls with a completeness that I cannot put into words. So I would open the transfer screen on my banking app, and I would do it again. When Chad called to tell me about the wedding, I was genuinely happy. Portia and Chad had been together for 12 years. The wedding was something they'd kept delaying, and now they were finally doing it. A venue in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. 220 guests. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something," Chad said about 2 weeks after the engagement announcement. "Portia's parents are going through a really hard time financially. Dad's had health problems, and we've stretched ourselves just buying the venue deposit." He paused. "I know this is a lot to ask." I asked how much. There was a silence. "The whole thing." "But, Mom, it's a one-time thing. It's the wedding. You'll be there for all of it. It'll be your day, too." I asked for a budget breakdown. He emailed it to me the next morning. The venue, catering, flowers, photographer, music, invitations, the rehearsal dinners, hotel room blocks for out-of-town guests, $114,300. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time with that email open. I thought about George. I thought about what he would say. He would have said, "Adele, don't." But George was gone, and I was sitting in our house alone, and Chad was my son, and those were my granddaughters, and the wedding would happen whether I helped or not, and if I helped, at least I would be part of it. I wrote the check. I hand-delivered it to Chad when I drove up to Chicago for a visit the following weekend. He hugged me for a long time in his driveway. "Mom, I promise. Once things settle after the wedding, we're going to make all of this right. I promise." I believed him. I am not sure why, after everything, I still believed him. But I did. The wedding was in September. I drove the 6 hours to Lake Geneva alone, checked into a room at the inn the couple had designated for family, and unpacked my dress. Pale blue, which Portia had approved when I'd sent her a photo. I'd had it altered. I'd bought new shoes that didn't quite fit right. I had my hair set the morning of the ceremony. I found Chad near the entrance to the reception hall during cocktail hour, looking handsome and flushed with happiness. He embraced me. "You look beautiful, Mom. I'm so glad you're here." Then, about 40 minutes later, as the reception hall doors were being opened and guests were finding their seats, one of the wedding coordinators approached me. A young woman with a clipboard and a headset. "Mrs. Alderton," she said, "your seat is at table 12. Table 12 was not on the seating chart I'd been shown when Chad consulted me 3 months earlier. In that version, I had been at table 2, with Chad's childhood friends and their spouses, people I knew, close to the head table. Table 12 was against the back wall, adjacent to the kitchen service doors, which kept swinging open as the catering staff moved in and out. My table mates were 3 of Portia's cousins I met, 2 of their spouses, and 2 children under 5 who spent most of the evening climbing under the tablecloth. I sat down. I smoothed my dress. I smiled at the cousins, whose names I immediately forgot, and I thought, he moved me. Not the coordinator. Not Portia's mother. Chad. He would have finalized that seating chart. I knew because he had called me twice in August to ask my opinions on various table configurations. He had moved me from table 2 to table 12, and he had not told me, and he had not explained. The toasts began. I watched my son stand at the front of the room, arm around his new wife, and raise a glass. He thanked her parents. He thanked his groomsmen. He thanked the wedding planner by name, he said. "And of course, we are grateful to everyone who made this day possible." And then he moved on. Everyone who made this day possible. I had written a check for $114,000, and I was everyone. I excused myself to use the restroom. I stood in a bathroom stall in a Lake Geneva wedding venue in a pale blue dress that didn't quite fit right, and I breathed very slowly in and very slowly out. I thought about the girls. I thought about June asking me last Christmas to braid her hair. I thought about Lily reading aloud to me from a chapter book she was proud of, her finger tracing each word. And then something shifted. Something I hadn't felt since those first terrible months after George died, when survival instinct takes over and you do what you have to do without asking permission from your grief. A cold, clarifying kind of certainty. I went back to my table. I sat through the dinner. I ate the salmon. I watched my son and his wife have their first dance, and when the music got loud and the dancing started and no one was watching table 12, I took out my phone and I called my bank. I had never pulled a full account history before. I'd always trusted my own memory, my own records, but I asked the representative to email me a complete statement of all outgoing transfers, exceeding $5,000 over the preceding 4 years. He did. I refreshed my email twice before it came through. I sat at table 12 in a Lake Geneva reception hall with my phone under the tablecloth and I read it. $261,400. That was the total. Over 4 years, across 11 separate transfers, I had sent my son $261,400. The $40,000 for the house down payment, the tuition, 3 years of it, the car, the furnace, the medical bills, a loan for what Chad had described as a short-term cash flow problem at his firm, and the wedding. None of it had been repaid, not $1. I also, sitting there at table 12 with the kitchen doors banging beside me, asked the representative about the process for removing a secondary account holder. After George died, I had added Chad to my savings account so he could help me manage things if anything happened to me. The representative walked me through it. It could be done online or at a branch. I flew home 2 days later. I'd planned to stay through Sunday, but I checked out Saturday morning, told Chad I wasn't feeling well, which was partially true. He hugged me at the door of the inn, distracted by departing guests and his new wife's family. Feel better, Mom. I'll call you next week. He didn't call the following week. He called 3 weeks later, and only because the savings account notification had triggered. Mom. His voice, when I answered, was controlled but thin at the edges. I got a notification from the bank about the shared account. I removed you from the account, I said. I should have done it sooner. A silence. Then, why? Because I've been thinking. I said I needed to think about things more carefully going forward. Thinking about what? We've never had any problems. I let that sit for a moment. Chad, do you remember the amount of the check I wrote for your wedding? Of course, and we appreciate it more than— How much was it? Another silence. The budget was around $100,000, $114,300. That was the exact amount. And before that, there was the down payment on your house, the school tuition, 3 years, the car, the furnace, 2 rounds of what you called medical bills, the loan for the firm. Do you want me to keep going? Mom, those were family loans. That's different from— You've repaid none of them. We've been in a tight spot, you know that. The market has been difficult. Real estate is— Chad, I have the bank statements. I am looking at them right now. $261,000 over 4 years. 0 repaid. The silence this time was longer. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. Something harder underneath. I think you're confused, Mom. You haven't been the same since Dad. It's been hard on all of us watching you. You've been isolating, making impulsive decisions, removing me from the account without even discussing it. That's not rational behavior for someone in your situation. My situation. You're alone. You're grieving. You're 67. These are big financial decisions to be making without someone in your corner. You're in my corner, I said. That's what you've been telling me for 4 years. He did not respond to that. I said, I need some time to think. And I ended the call. I sat in my kitchen on Claremont Avenue in the house George and I had paid off in 2009, and I understood something I had been carefully not understanding for a very long time. My son was not in my corner. He had never been outside of his own corner. I had simply been a resource he had access to, and I had confused his proximity with love. I called my old friend Vera the next morning. Vera and I had been friends since nursing school, 43 years. She had retired from hospital administration 2 years before I did, and had since moved to be near her own grandchildren in Asheville, North Carolina. I told her everything: the full accounting, the wedding, the back table, the phone call. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about Vera. Then she said, Adele, you need to talk to an estate attorney, today if possible. I have an appointment Monday morning, I told her. Good, and I'm coming up Thursday. She arrived with a rolling suitcase and a casserole and stayed for 2 weeks. The attorney's name was Gordon Hale, recommended by my physician. I brought a printed copy of the bank statements, a log I had started keeping of every financial request and transfer dating back to George's death, and a recording I had made of the most recent phone call with Chad, which my state permitted without the other party's consent. Gordon Hale reviewed everything slowly and without visible reaction, which I appreciated. Then he said, Mrs. Alderton, what would you like to accomplish? I want to protect what's left, I said, and I want it to be legal and unambiguous, so there's no room for anyone to claim I didn't know what I was doing. He looked at me over his reading glasses. How much is remaining? I had approximately $420,000 in investments and savings, plus the house, which had been appraised at $310,000. I had my pension and Social Security. It's enough, I said, if I'm careful. We began the process. A revocable living trust for the house and investments. A new will, replacing the previous one in which Chad had been sole beneficiary. Educational trusts for June and Lily, set to release when each of them turned 22. The remainder of my estate, after the girls' trusts, designated to a nursing scholarship fund at the hospital where I had worked. Gordon also noted, gently but directly, that Chad's comment about my mental state, the isolating, the impulsive decisions, the suggestion that grief had impaired my judgment, was not an uncommon tactic in cases like these. He recommended I schedule a comprehensive cognitive evaluation with my physician as a precautionary measure to create documentation. I scheduled it for the following week. My doctor of 19 years sat across from me and said, at the conclusion of the evaluation, "Adele, there is nothing wrong with you that grief and a difficult family situation haven't put there. You are sharp as you have ever been." I had the written report in hand before Chad's attorney sent the letter. It arrived 6 weeks after my conversation with Gordon Hale. 2 pages on letterhead, citing concerns about my cognitive capacity, my isolation, my recent financial decisions, and formally requesting that I submit to an independent psychiatric evaluation prior to making any further changes to my estate. I forwarded it to Gordon within the hour. He called me that afternoon. "They're making a move," he said. "It's not uncommon, and it's rarely successful when the other party has done their homework, which you have. I want you to do one more thing. Stay somewhere other than your house for the next few weeks. Is there somewhere you can go?" "Vera's," I said. "She's already offered." "Perfect. Go. Don't tell Chad where. Let me handle the correspondence." I drove to Asheville the next morning. Vera had a guest room with a window that looked out over the ridge, and she made coffee every morning that was better than anything I'd had in years. And we sat on her porch in the evenings and talked the way we used to talk in our 20s, when everything felt possible and almost nothing felt settled. I turned off my phone for 4 days. When I turned it back on, there were 32 missed calls from Chad and 11 from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be his attorney's office. The voicemails tracked a recognizable arc. The early ones were concerned. "Mom, I'm worried. Please call me back." The middle ones were frustrated. "This is not how you handle things. We need to talk like adults." The later ones were something else entirely. "You're making a serious mistake. The evaluation request is for your protection. If you won't cooperate voluntarily, we may have no choice but to pursue this through the court." I listened to all of them twice. Then I called Gordon. "They've petitioned for a competency hearing," he told me. "Filed yesterday. We expected this. Here's what happens next." What happened next was a hearing in a Cook County courtroom in November. Chad had filed in Illinois, where he resided, which Gordon successfully challenged, and the matter was moved to Franklin County, Ohio, where I lived. That alone seemed to rattle Chad's attorney, who had apparently expected the home court advantage. Vera drove up from Asheville and sat beside me in the gallery. Gordon sat at the table with me. Across the room, Chad and Portia sat with their attorney, a compact man in a gray suit who spoke with the practiced patience of someone accustomed to making unreasonable positions sound reasonable. Chad testified first. He spoke about his concern for me, my isolation since George's death, my tendency toward impulsive decisions, the removal from the joint account without warning. He spoke about the money I had given over the years, as though it were something that had happened to me rather than something I had chosen, framing each transfer as evidence of diminished capacity rather than misguided generosity. Then Gordon cross-examined him. "Chad, your mother transferred $40,000 to your account in January of the year after your father died. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Did she condition that transfer on repayment?" "She offered it freely. I have an email she sent the same day the transfer cleared." Gordon read from it. "This is a loan, Chad. I trust you to pay it back when you're able." Does that sound like someone offering something freely? She was confused about, "Is the email there in front of you?" "Yes." "What does it say?" "It says what you read." "And in the 4 years since that email, how much have you repaid?" Chad looked at his attorney. The attorney gave a small, unhelpful nod. "We've had financial difficulties." "How much, Chad?" "Nothing yet." Gordon then entered the cognitive evaluation, my physician's testimony, and a written statement from my nurse supervisor, who had worked alongside me for 20 years and described me as one of the most consistently sharp and methodical people she had ever known. He also entered the recording of the phone call, the part where Chad said, "You're alone. You're grieving. You're 67. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Teresa Boland. She had silver-streaked hair and reading glasses she took on and off throughout the proceedings. When she spoke at the close of the hearing, she did not soften her words. The petition for a competency determination is denied. The evidence presented by the petitioner reflects not concern for his mother's well-being, but an interest in maintaining access to her financial resources. The evidence presented by Mrs. Alderton reflects a woman who, if anything, has demonstrated exceptional clarity in identifying a situation that was not in her interest and taking lawful steps to address it. This court finds no basis for any further proceedings in this matter. She looked at Chad directly when she said the last part. Outside the courthouse, Chad tried to approach me. I stopped him with a look. I had practiced what I would say if this moment came, but when it arrived, I found I didn't want to say any of it. There was nothing that needed saying that the judge hadn't already said. I walked to Vera's car. She put the heat on because it was November and cold, and we sat in the parking garage for a moment before she pulled out. "You okay?" she said. I thought about it honestly. "I think so," I said. "Ask me in 6 months." She did. The answer, by then, was yes. The court transcripts were public record. A columnist at the Columbus Dispatch picked up the story in January, framed around elder financial exploitation, which had become a subject of increasing local coverage. The piece used our real names because the proceedings were public. It described the transfers, the wedding, the back table, the competency petition, and the ruling. Chad's firm, from what I was able to learn through mutual contacts, did not respond well to the coverage. Commercial real estate is a relationship business. Several clients quietly moved their accounts. He was not fired, but he was sidelined, moved to a less visible role. The trajectory he had been on stalled. I did not enjoy knowing this. I want to be careful to say that. There is no version of watching your child suffer consequences that feels like a victory. But I also did not feel responsible for it. He had made choices. The choices had weight. Portia emailed me in February. It was 3 paragraphs. The first acknowledged that they had behaved badly. The second was a defense of Chad that somewhat undermined the first. The third asked whether there was any path forward. I read it several times. I did not respond immediately. I am still thinking about how to respond. That is the honest answer. June called my landline in March. She is 9, and she found the number herself, which tells you something about her. "Grandma," she said. "Mom doesn't know I'm calling. I just wanted to say I miss you." I talked to her for 45 minutes. She told me about a book she was reading, a science project about weather patterns, a disagreement she'd had with her best friend that had since been resolved. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was. She asked if she could call again. I said yes, anytime. She said, "Even if Mom is mad," I said. "Especially then." She laughed. It sounded so much like Chad used to laugh when he was small that it caught me off guard. We hung up and I sat for a while in the quiet of the house, and I did not feel any of the things I had expected to feel. Not vindicated, not settled, just very aware of what was real and what had turned out not to be, and the long project of learning the difference between the two. In April, I started volunteering at the children's unit of my old hospital 3 mornings a week. Not nursing, just reading and sitting with the little ones whose parents couldn't always be there. I had forgotten, somewhere in the years of George's death and the family management and the transfers and the legal proceedings, what it felt like to be useful in a way that had nothing to do with money. I remember, in May, I took a train to Portland, Oregon, because I had always wanted to see the Pacific Northwest, and there was nothing stopping me. I walked along the waterfront. I ate good seafood. I bought a small piece of pottery at an artist's market and carried it home carefully in my carry-on because I wanted it on my windowsill. In June, Gordon called to confirm that the trust was fully established and all documents were in order. "Everything is protected," he said. "You can proceed with your life." I thanked him and went outside and sat on the porch, the same porch where George had taught himself to identify birds the summer before he died, and I thought about what proceeding with my life looked like. It looked like this, I think. The book club I joined at the library, where a woman named Rosalind, no relation to anyone in this story, lent me a novel that changed how I think about forgiveness. The letters I started writing, by hand, to old colleagues I had let drift away. The tomatoes I planted in the back garden and actually managed not to kill. The Tuesday mornings at the hospital. The phone calls with June. I have not spoken to Chad since the courthouse parking lot. I don't know what I will do when that changes, and I believe it will change, because he is still my son, however much he has made that word complicated. I'm not ready yet. I may not be ready for a long time, but I am not closed. The money is gone. Almost all of what I gave is simply gone, and I have made my peace with that, because the alternative, spending the rest of my life performing grief over it, seemed like a worse use of whatever time I have. What I did not lose was the house George and I paid off in 2009, or my pension, or my mind, or Vera, or June's voice on the telephone asking me if she can call, even if her mother is mad. I didn't lose myself either. I came close. I think about that sometimes. How close I came to being so hollowed out by giving and being diminished for giving that there would have been nothing left to protect. If you are listening to this and you recognize something in it, the requests that started small, the promises that never materialized, the slow erosion of your own sense of what you deserve, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to say, I have given what I can give, and now I am going to take care of what remains. That is not cruelty, that is survival, and survival, I have learned, is not the same as living, but it is the foundation of it. Thank you for being here with me tonight. Please share this story if it found you at the right time. Someone in your life might need to hear it. Good night.